Hey everyone, this is Mike and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Sober Living Podcast. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. If you've been here before, well, welcome back. Quick disclaimer, I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I don't represent them. The opinions I share are my own. Today's message comes from Daily Reflections for June 16th and is based on page 7 of As Bill Sees It. Now I've reworded the passage to avoid any copyright issues. Today's reading tells us that I've learned that God doesn't make spirituality complicated for those who sincerely seek Him. The spiritual path isn't narrow or reserved for a select few. It's open, welcoming, and available to anyone who honestly wants to grow and find a deeper connection with something greater than themselves. This is a very personal message for me because I've had an interesting relationship with God, religion, and spirituality throughout my whole life. I've literally been all over the spectrum with it. The way I think about today is this. Religion, that's the story we tell ourselves about God, creation, and how we should live our lives. Faith, well, that's believing that story. And as for spirituality, that's our relationship with God. And whether that definition is right or wrong, I don't know. But that's how I understand it today. Now, I was raised Catholic, but I started questioning my beliefs at a very early age. And at different points in my life, I'd explore different ideas and beliefs because I was always searching for something. I was always searching for that power greater than myself. I was so drawn to religion and spirituality that at one point I even felt called to become a Catholic priest. The strange thing is, though, that while I felt drawn toward service to God, to being the priest and to the priesthood, I was struggling with Christianity itself. I had so many questions, and I could never accept the answers I was being given. And to be honest, I still feel that calling to serve God today. Now, when I was around 20 years old, I discovered Islam, and I quickly felt like I had found what I was looking for. I loved the structure, the discipline, and the certainty. Everything seemed so black and white. If I had a question about something, there was usually an answer I could accept. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I could put a name to what I'd already believed. For example, one of the teachings in Islam is that alcohol is forbidden. And that made perfect sense to me because I could clearly see the damage alcohol caused in people's lives. It aligned with things I had already believed. Now, unfortunately, over time, I started believing that because I thought I was right, everyone who believed differently must be wrong. I became pretty arrogant about it all. Looking back, I had a lot of faith in my religion, but I just wasn't spiritual. I knew what I believed, but I didn't really have a relationship with God. I knew the rules, I knew the teachings, I knew the answers, but I didn't have that connection with God that I was supposed to have. I think part of the problem is in Islam, we pray in Arabic. Now, it's a beautiful language, don't get me wrong, but it's not one I speak or understand. And if I'm being honest, a lot of that time, I was simply reciting words. I knew I was supposed to be praying, but I wasn't connecting with what I was saying. So was I really praying then? And as for drinking, I'm not going to lie and sit here and tell you that I had never drank before I converted to Islam, or that I never drank afterwards. That simply wouldn't be true. The reality is, though, that alcohol wasn't a major part of my life at that point. That eventually changed, though. I had the opportunity to travel to India for work. And before I left, my doctor warned me not to drink the water there because it'd make me sick. However, alcohol, that was safe. Nobody there knew me. Nobody knew my beliefs. Nobody knew who I was. So, I decided to drink. I spent most of that trip completely drunk. And when I came home, the drinking didn't stop. In fact, my drinking got worse. Other problems also started piling up. I began struggling with severe mental health issues, and my life had become completely unmanageable. Now, I mentioned earlier that I had become pretty arrogant, and I put myself up on this huge pedestal. Well, eventually God came along and knocked that pedestal out from underneath me. He sent me crashing. Yeah, he put me in my place. And at the time, I thought alcohol was the biggest problem in my life. Well, looking back, I think my pride was every bit as dangerous. And eventually, I just gave up everything for alcohol. I stopped praying, I quit going to the mosque, and I felt so ashamed of myself. I felt absolutely disconnected from God. I'd spent years in that state. I'd just wake up, drink, and repeat. I tried sobering up a few times and created rules to try and keep me sober, but nothing worked. Until I eventually came into AA, that is. One of the first things I heard in those meetings was that if I wanted to stay sober, I needed to find a power greater than myself. People would tell me that it could even be the doorknob I turned to get into the meeting. And what I loved was that nobody told me what I had to believe. They simply told me to find a power greater than myself. I still remember when I got to step 3, that I was having a conversation with my sponsor about it. I told him I felt like I was spiritually coming up short. I thought I was supposed to have some kind of a spiritual experience that I just wasn't having. This Zen moment. He said, Mike, just fake it till you make it. Just keep praying. So, I did. I started saying the Serenity Prayer and the third step prayer every single day. And little by little, those prayers started meaning something to me. One line in particular from the third step prayer really resonated with me. And that's, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. God, I just love that. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Man, how powerful is that? So about, a month or so later after I had that conversation with my sponsor, another guy in the program asked me what step I was on. And I told him I was still stuck on step 3 because I still hadn't had that spiritual awakening. He laughed and he said, hey, Mike, I decided to lose 10 pounds this year, but I still haven't lost any weight. You decide to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. Hey, that's step 3. You made the decision. Now move on. You'll get there. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized step 3 wasn't about having a spiritual awakening. It was about making a decision. And you know what? Since then, I've had a number of spiritual experiences and moments of growth. And every one of them has strengthened my faith in a power greater than myself. And looking back, that conversation was one of those moments. That was a God moment. And I didn't even realize I was having it. What I've come to realize is that most of my spiritual experiences haven't been dramatic at all. They haven't been strikes of lightning. They've usually just shown up in ordinary conversations, meetings, and moments of clarity when I least expected them. God seems to always show up in the people around me. Now, does that mean I know exactly who God is? No. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. Do I still have questions? Yup, every day. And you know what? Today I'm okay with that. What this reading reminds me is that spirituality isn't reserved for a select few. It's available to anyone who seeks it. That's what I love about AA. It doesn't tell me what name I have to use for God. It simply asks me to have faith in a power greater than myself and to keep seeking. I still consider Islam my religion of choice. I don't actively practice it today, but I still believe in it. And at the same time, I can honestly say that I'm far more spiritual today than I ever was before. Years ago, yeah, I had religion and faith, but I didn't really have a relationship with God. But today, I feel a connection to a higher power than I never had back then. And for me, that has made all the difference. So here's what I'm taking away from this today. I can remember that I don't need to have all the answers. I don't need to know exactly who God is or understand everything about spirituality. I can simply stay open-minded, keep seeking, and continue building my relationship with a power greater than myself. Hey, thanks for listening. Stay sober, stay strong, and keep moving forward. Until next time.